My name is Leif Marshall. I work at the Department of Comparative Politics at the University of Bergen. I'm here with Ingrid Kollegassen on video link and Marianne Tøversen. We're here to discuss a country called Haiti. The title for this webinar or breakfast meeting is called Haiti, Fragile Country, the Word Forgot. With me, as I mentioned, I have Ingrid on video link. Ingrid Kollegassen is the co-founder and manager of Project Haiti, which is an NGO that has worked in Haiti since 2000. He's also a project leader at Norwegian Center for Rural Medicine. He was working on projects in Colombia. Her NGO Project Haiti runs educational programs, schools, and health clinics, and have done so for many years in Haiti. We're very happy to have you with us. I also have Marianne Tøversen with us. She is a PhD research fellow at the Department of Comparative Politics and here at the Islamic Institute. And she works on topics related to gender and politics. And she's doing a PhD on the Haitian judiciary from a gender perspective, with a focus on women judges. Since 2018, she's been doing 5 months of field work in Haiti. So today we're here to talk about a country that we don't hear so much about in the press. In the blurb for this this meeting mentions the earthquake in Haiti that devastated large parts of the country more than 10 years ago. Then Haiti was in the news and caught a lot of international attention. Since then, we hear rarely about the country. It's only mentioned, for instance, when pop singers like Michel Martelly runs for president, or even the more famously Wyclef Jean tries to run for elections. So we're here to try to correct that for a full audience here in Bergen and on the web. And I want to start with you, Ingrid, who has 20 years of experience working in the country, living in the country, traveling to and from the country. I wanted to ask you whether you can tell us first a little bit about the Haitian society and maybe give us a short introduction to the country and what has been going on since the earthquake, and maybe also the consequences of the large earthquake back in 2010.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to join in this talk about Haiti. As you said, it's not very often we get to talk about this beautiful country far away that we love so much. Yes, I've been living and working in Haiti since '97, actually, so almost 25 years almost. Since the earthquake, I guess for a minute and a half, there was a lot of hope that things might change. With slogans such as "Let's build back better" from the international community. And as we all know, that did not necessarily happen. So I think as a society, Haitians are very optimistic and positive for a minute, and then they realize that maybe it's the same old thing happening again. It's a country with obviously wonderful people. I know that Haitians don't like the word resilient because we all like to use that, but I'm using it anyway. I've been close and working closely with my staff, for example, in Haiti for 20 years. Most of them have been with me for 20 years. And they are indeed very resilient and, always with an optimistic view on things, although the reality is that it's a very corrupt and difficult country to work in. It's extremely complicated because it's always 2 steps in front and then 3 back when you try to do any project, really. So it's a complicated society in that sense to work in. People are very skeptical to the political leaders, as they should be. And the corruption is so entrenched at every level. So it's sort of from the bottom up all the way to the top. And of course, the national leaders that should be role models for the populations are, I'm sorry to say, the worst crooks, honestly. And you see the result in the society, as poor as it is, it has to do with the leadership for sure. So yes, I don't think a lot of good things happened after all the billions of dollars being apparently poured into the country after the earthquake. And also one thing is to say and pledge the money. Another thing is to actually send it over, so to speak. So that's another issue, of course. So yes, still extremely complicated. And lately, 10 years after the earthquake, I think the last couple of years have been honestly worse than, you know, just after the earthquake in that sense. So it's very difficult, but we still have hope, I could say.
Thank you. You mentioned the last couple of years, and I'd say there are two reasons why we're organizing this meeting that was postponed. We were supposed to organize this in the spring, but it was postponed due to the pandemic. One of the reasons is, of course, that it's 10 years since this devastating earthquake that killed somewhere between 150 and 250,000 people. We never will totally know how many actually died, and of course had a devastating impact on infrastructure and on society. But the other is the recent crisis that you've been mentioning. Things have, from a relatively bad position, turned towards the worst the last couple of years. And you, Marianne, have followed that conflict, and you've been there the last couple of years. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the current political crisis that the country is going through, and maybe also starting with the controversial election of President Moïse back in 2015, 2016. So if you can run us through a little bit about what's going on now and why Ingrid is saying that things have taken a turn for the worse for the last couple of years.
Yeah. So Moïse, I think that's the right pronunciation. Moïse, or Moïse, yes. He was a relatively unknown banana plantation farmer when he got elected in 2016, and people say that he was like handpicked by former President Jovenel Moïse to represent his bold-headed party, which is the name of the party in power. Both Moïse and Moïse have bold heads, so maybe that's secretary, I don't know. But anyway, Moïse won the election with 55% of the vote. But there was a lot of allegations of fraud, and only 21% actually voted in the election. So his presidency was quite contested already from the very beginning. So when he got elected, Moïse promised that he would bring food on the plates of the Haitian people and money in their pockets. But that's much easier said than done in the context of Haiti. And actually, since he got elected, there's been a lot of like fuel and food shortages, which is connected to, for instance, the crisis in Venezuela. Haiti is a lot of fuel from Venezuela, but they have problems at the moment. So that's of course created frustration. And the inflation is just skyrocketing. It was 20% in 2019, and there's also been a drop and prices on important goods. So a lot of patients don't have access to food. And to top this, Moïse was accused of embezzling millions of dollars from the Central Caribbean Fund, which is like a strategic alliance between. It's okay? Yeah, it's fine. Okay. Yeah, it's a strategic oil alliance between Venezuela and its Caribbean neighbors, which was opposed to the deal for Haiti. So all the money saved from this oil alliance was supposed to go to badly needed social development projects for Haiti. And now the president himself has been accused of, basically taking out the money from Venezuela. So when these accusations hit in 2019, people took to the streets and called for Moïse's resignation, but he refused to and he wants to stay until re-election, which is in 2 years. So for many months, the whole country was paralyzed, and no one could get around. Schools were closed, courts were set on fire, and it was a very frustrating time for people. Yeah.
Maybe while they're on the changes stage, I'll try to bring you in, Ingrid. We heard about the political conflicts, and you mentioned that Haitians are resilient, but this is of course not a new situation for Haiti, that you have political leaders that are accused of corruption, that you have high-level political conflicts. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what the general feeling about from the population is regarding their politicians, regarding what's going on, because you mentioned that for a moment there, maybe after the earthquake, there was this sentiment that one would start over, one would start a new beginning and really try to reconstruct Haiti in a positive way. But now, 10 years after many disappointments, what is the reaction among the Haitian population towards these conflicts that Marianne is talking about?
Yes, as we have seen the last couple of years, the population has mobilized in a much more organized way with the Petrocaribe. So where is the money from the slogan, where is the money from the Petrocaribe? Where is it? And so that has been a much more organized manifestation, if you like, than previously by both Haitian diaspora and Haitians locally. So we have seen that, that has worked in the sense that more people in the rest of the world have learned about this huge corruption scandal that has happened. And we're talking billions of dollars. It's not, the amount is so ridiculous, and it's almost impressive how it's possible to steal that much money, honestly. But people are also they become apathetic in the sense that years ago, I would talk to a lot of people who said, we have to get into politics ourselves to make changes. And it's really, really difficult to do that because the system is so corrupt and the system is so bureaucratic and top down, if you like. My ex-husband, I'm no longer called Said, by the way. He's the mayor of a municipality in the south, in Saint Louis du Sud, and I was part of his campaign in 2014-15. And it's just extremely difficult for someone to kind of enter that scene and become a good politician, because you meet so much problems all the way. I mean, everybody has an agenda, and as much as you want to be, the one person that leads the way and do real changes, which I do think that my ex-husband is doing, you have to be so stubborn and so, really you have to use all your force to be able to enter into that scene, because it's so complicated. I remember the leader of the election committee in the municipality would text us and say, well, my daughter is getting married. What can you do for me? It's open. It's so open. It's not even hidden. Text messages are being sent. If you wanted to look at that, you could, it's almost funny if it wasn't so depressing, actually. So for young Haitians to enter that scene and become the leaders, it's extremely, extremely difficult. However, I do think it's possible. And I think the hopeful thing is that a lot of Haitians are involved and they have their own organizations and they do their own fundraising and they build a school so I think young Haitians are, they are not completely destroyed by this, but the overall population, I would say, is they are almost apathetic because it's so complicated to enter that scene and to change. Yeah.
Are there any alternatives to Moïse and his party now at the elite level? Are there any political competition? Do we see any? You talked about nations are becoming more organized. Are they becoming also more organized as political alternative? Do we see any movement regarding that? You mentioned the conflicts around Moïse recently, but we see in terms of political parties, looking at a new direction, new leaders that are presenting themselves at the national level and so on?
I don't think there are any clear who sits at the top, but the underlying inequalities, it's so hard to change anyway. The political system itself, it just works. But what also happened with these protests out after Christmas for some reason. And now the new conflict is about Moïse trying to check the constitution so that he can power. Working as a voice that's cool.
I can hardly hear you, yes.
Okay.
Vaguely, but it's bad. The sound is very sort of on and off on you, Marianne.
Maybe we can say, yeah. Okay, so anyway, yeah, not trying to give the presidency more power, because after Haiti had decades of dictatorship, when they transitioned to democracy in the late 80s, they wanted to reform the constitution to make sure again. So what they now have is a very system of power sharing, which makes it very hard to do anything. The parliament are trying to block everything the president is. So now the conflict is about trying to stop.
Thank you. And on top of this, of course, the questions we can't escape in these times of a pandemic that has hit globally. And of course, Haiti is a poor country. I don't know if you've been back there since March, but could you tell us how hard the country has been hit by this pandemic? How it affects health-wise is one thing, but also the economy, which from the get-go wasn't in a very good shape.
Yes, thank you. No, I have not been back since last March. But for one reason or another, Haiti has not been hit as hard with death by COVID. It's been 220 people have died from COVID, and about 8,000 have had it. So it hasn't been as bad as one was afraid of to begin with in Haiti. Haitians don't believe in it. First of all, they don't think it. They think it's a conspiracy from the government. As per usual, when the state declares a state of emergency, Haitians don't even care about it, because in their book, it's just a way to get their hands on the money that is now allocated to the state of emergency, and they don't have to report on it as rigid as normal. So that is the first thing that any Haitians would say with any kind of state of emergency declaration, so to speak. But yes, for sure, the economic consequences are felt, and maybe first and foremost because their families in the US or in Canada are no longer sending money to them, because they are probably unemployed. There's 30 million plus unemployed in the US, if it's not more. So that has been affecting the economy for sure. So yeah, and life goes on as normal. There are some campaigns that you should use masks, and then there are no. There's a whole whole thing about where to find masks and how much it should cost and who's producing it. And so people are not really bothered about the whole COVID-19 thing. Life goes on as usual, actually.
That's interesting and quite a relief because an exception, of course, to the pattern that we see elsewhere, both in the Caribbean and Central America and South America, of course. Now, Haiti is, if we haven't mentioned it already, considered the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, this position is not new, but it's quite unique that Haiti is one country that has actually had negative economic growth since World War II. It's a country that is poorer today than it was back in 1950. And of course, then not only due to the earthquake and natural disasters, which we see from year to year in Haiti, it's a country many would argue that is in need of international assistance and aid. But at the same time, we know that international aid, international assistance is very controversial in Haiti. And many argue that the international society, including the United States, is a problem or is part of the problem or large parts of the problem of the country. And you, of course, Ingrid, you've been working with a smaller NGO in this perspective, at least. Could you tell us a little bit about the effects of the often massive international presence in the country that we've seen after the earthquake, and the effectiveness of it? You mentioned corruption linked to Petrocaribe, but of course, there are many other donors, there are many other organizations. So if you could tell us a little bit about this presence and the effect this aid has, and to what extent maybe Haiti would be better off with being a little bit more forgotten, maybe?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would say that after the earthquake, with a lot of people were asking themselves after a while, where are all the projects? Where are the reconstruction projects? Where is the housing? What we've seen, of course, was that there are some ghost towns around the country now with new buildings put up where people actually don't want to live there because they're far away and they're in the middle of nowhere and there are no jobs there. And the other example would be the many sports arenas that was built with reconstruction money, led by Martelly's son, one of his sons, actually, mentioned in the reports coming out from the Court of Auditors that have looked into this, where the money went. I would say that the international community doesn't have a very good reputation in Haiti amongst Haitians, because they feel that very often these organizations have their own agenda and they are very top-bottom led. So a lot of people are asking themselves, and you mentioned everybody wants to work in Cité Soleil, but why is Cité Soleil so terrible still after all these years, when all the NGOs apparently are working in the most dangerous slum area in the world? A lot of NGOs like to put that in their documents. And of course, with the UN coming in and being a part of the country for 10, 12 years, they have also brought, the cholera and the sexual harassment cases, the little brown babies running around in the south of Haiti now with fathers in the Latin American countries and God knows where. So I would say that the international community as such doesn't have a particularly positive standing amongst Haitians. They don't feel that they have necessarily been there for the good of the people, if you like. Yeah.
Marianne, Ingrid also mentioned the UN here that recently left the country after having been there for 15 years. It's the second stint that the UN has there over the last 30 years. And of course, Ingrid, you also mentioned some of the controversies regarding the UN, the cholera epidemic, sexual abuse, and so on and so forth. So I guess many people might have been celebrating when the UN left, but at the same time, UN presence in a country like Haiti or other country is often seen as a stabilizing force, and we know from the last couple of years that there are huge political conflicts at the elite level. And could you tell us a little bit how, Marianne, how what has the effect been of the UN leaving the country in midst of a political crisis that we're seeing now?
So the UN mandate is over. Supposed to leave a long time ago, but then the earthquake hit and they extended their mandate. So the point was to like stabilize and bring peace to Haiti after a very violent period. But what has happened? And they were also supposed to train the Haitian National Police so that they could keep order themselves. But after the new staff, which they are called, left, the crime levels in the capital has increased again. So, you know, since January, there's been like, I think 150 people have been killed in gang violence. Kidnappings have increased again. So it's a really chaotic and dangerous environment. It's really not the best timing for stabilizing force, perhaps. But what is complicated about So what is complicated about the violence in Haiti is that armed groups have often been used as a political tool for politicians. So you might have the case that political actors are using the increased insecurity for their own agenda. I was during the protests last year, some of my Asian friends said that protests that are just they are just paid by the politicians. I was thinking, now you're really cynical. But then I actually gave a ride to a politician, and he saw him actually giving money to a gang leader to put up some barricades down the road. So he actually admitted that to me. He said, I just have to pay this gang leader so that he could set up this roadblock so that I can put pressure on the president. So it's very like a complicated history of using these armed groups for political purposes. So yes, it might be that some political forces are taking use of this new environment.
Thank you. Marianne, you're also working with a project on the courts and women on the courts and women on the bench, the project is called. How does, I'd like to ask, how do you research the courts in an environment like this? But how do the courts actually operate? We know that, of course, in any type of democracy, some sort of independent judiciary is more or less a prerequisite for a functioning democracy. So could you please tell us if you have any results yet already from your research, or can you tell us a little bit about the position of the judiciary, because you're talking about armed groups as the prolongation of political conflict, the use of armed groups by regular politicians and so on and so forth. It does not seem like an apt environment for establishing a functioning judiciary. So what role does the judiciary play here? You're also talking about the legacy of human rights abuses, crime, and so on and so forth. So what role does the judiciary play in Haiti and in all of these conflicts?
Yeah, the judiciary is very, very routine. We can say that all the branches of the police, the judiciary is the least of this. And it's used as, again, as a tool for politicians to stay in jail, keep themselves in their transnational jail. So it's a lot of corruption and a lot of process of judges and prosecutors, and also a lot of the judges I talked to complain about how they receive weekly calls from some person in the parliament or in the executive who tries to influence their cases and say, hey, you have to get this guy out of jail, he didn't commit that way, he's a friend of mine, etc. So the judiciary is not independent at all, and it really hampers these constant political pressures are really hampering hindering the justices from doing their job. And that's also perhaps a legacy from the Duvalier and also people's trust in the judiciary is super low. It's costly, and it's usually courts are far away from where people live, and the language they speak in courts is French, while most people speak Haitian Creole. So justice is not really accessible for most people. And also, the security situation that has become worse during the past years is also affecting the judiciary. Just last month, the president of the Bar Association in Port-au-Prince, a very famous and constitutional lawyer, was assassinated in his home. And the only female Supreme Court judge, Mandela Court, he received death threats just a couple of days ago. So it's a very situation for the judiciary. But one of the few positive developments that I have found in my own research is that judicial reforms that's been installed since the 1990s have actually created more merit-based appointment procedures, so that political contexts matter less now. It's rather what? Anyway, so this is this better? So this has created actually more women into the judiciary. So because women's representation in Haiti is 3% women in parliament, which is among the lowest numbers in the world. So these are one of the few areas where women actually roles, and hopefully it will continue in the future. That of course depends on how much money are given to these judicial institutions, and especially trained.
Thank you. We started a bit late, and we've been struggling with some technical problems throughout. And I just want to put out the last questions, maybe to Ingrid or to Marianne, whoever wants to answer, and then I think we'll take a round of questions. I'm not sure how it will be done online, but please, if you do have any questions listening in, start preparing them. Ingrid, if you think about the situation in Haiti right now, and maybe start think about also the short-term future, what are the most pressing issues right now in Haiti? We've heard about the conflict. We know the underlying socioeconomic situation, poverty, inequality, and so on and so forth. But do you see any paths forward? Given this situation, and maybe how Haiti itself and its population, and to a certain extent also international society, can work with Haiti in order to aid in these pressing issues that we've been listening to.
Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, you know, the president is currently ruling by decree, and the Senate is only, you know, I think maybe there's 10 senators in the Senate right now. So the whole system is a little bit chaotic in the sense that it's not in order as it should be. So elections were supposed to happen this fall with the Senate and the municipal elections that have been postponed. So half the mayors of the country have continued because the president has told them to do so, and the rest have been replaced by a lot of people that are, of course, close to the president. So the elections need to happen for sure, sooner rather than later, actually. At the same time, the election period is always chaotic and always turns out violent. So I talked to a friend yesterday who said that the opposition, if you like, have now announced full speed forward from the 17th of October until January to get rid of the president, as they say. And so we are looking to a hectic period before January, I think. But yes, and we do need the support from the international community for sure. I also think that, we say that it's corrupt and it's complicated and difficult, but most Haitians are not complicated and corrupt. They just don't have those positions where they are, able to steal, if you like, and to abuse power. So there's so many decent, proper, good people that should be able to get a chance to be part of leading their country, if it's municipal level or national level. So I think if more people were willing to get into those positions, I think that we could see a change, but with the support of the international community for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Marianne. Do you have any last words on pressing issues and the road forward now? Election has been mentioned.
Of course, there's a lot of pressing issues after this for everyone, and also and how democracy, especially the international community, are pushing for elections. Democracy to be implemented. Nations don't feel because there's so much inequality and people are not getting access to this. So it's like maybe having a wider perspective of what democracy is, not just like having another. Change, or else you might have people starting to go back to dictatorship and all that.
Thank you. I think we'll run a little bit over time. If there are any questions, at least we're 5 minutes before the scheduled end here, but as I said, we started very late. So if there's anyone here in the audience in Bergen, or if there's anyone online that have questions, please send them our way and we'll read them out if they come online, and if not, you get the chance to ask them here in Bergen. But Johan Hindal had a comment here saying that one of the issues, of course, is that ideology does not play a role among the political actors and the parties in Haiti, and that the name of the game seems to be claiming power and keeping power, and talking about the need for a fundamental change in the political system. I don't know, Ingrid, if you want to take the challenge, how can one foresee a fundamental change in the political system? What would be required in order to get rid of some of the apathy that you've been mentioning, and the distrust towards the political elites, and of course the other elites that support the power that is?
Yes, I agree with Johan. Yeah, it's true. There are very little ideology behind most of the political parties. I agree. There's a saying, everybody wants to be president in Haiti, and it's a little bit true, actually. I think that it's not, the fundamental change has to happen maybe over a generation. It's not happening with this generation. Honestly, it's a lost generation, if you ask me. But, we need to focus on the little ones growing up. And one starting point would be to introduce Creole as the only language in schools, and then they could learn French or English or whatever. But I think that is something that is holding the education a little bit. And teachers that are teaching mathematics in French, and they're not actually fluent in French doing so. So you can imagine the complications that involves. So yeah, thinking long term is probably key, and education, as we know, would be the starting point.
Marianne, do you have any comments on that? Do you see any potential role for the judiciary in the time to come? Since you're working on it, I thought I'd put that to you.
Yes, well, it's been it's supposed to do. It needs to be, and at the moment, limit the budget to a minimum. So I've been talking to judges who will have papers necessary, call people into courts to their so for the judiciary to play this role. Also, there's a lot of people inside the judiciary who are really job and are trying their best, but it's a very precious situation to be in. So yeah, there's a lot of good people that could bring about the change in Haiti, but you just have to wait for them to do so.
Thank you. Any other questions, Bergen or elsewhere? There's. Oh yeah. Okay, sorry. I saw a hand. I was hoping that maybe one question. I don't know if we should wrap it up then, or we had some. I apologize. We had some problems with technology in this meeting, but these things happen. I know, Ingrid, any last words from you on the issue? Because Marianne mentioned one easy solution, which of course would be that the judiciary needs more resources, of course, to function adequately, not only in Haiti. I guess this is a general rule, but of course the socioeconomic situation of Haiti is quite problematic and of course deeply disturbing, since there's been lack of improvement, even negative development if we look at it over time. Is there any, of course there aren't any quick fixes, but do you see any signs that one could achieve some sort of at least economic stability, growth? Do you have any are there any solution that you can see in terms of trying to create at least some sort of socioeconomic development which could foster this rather long-term generational change that you talk about? You mentioned education, of course, but again, if the socioeconomic foundation is there or is going back and forth all the time, these long-term positive changes are really hard to create. So have you seen anything over the last 20 years of the solution in that respect?
I think there are examples in maybe municipal levels, not necessarily the chaos in the Senate and the national level, but I think there are a lot of examples when you go out in the districts, in the municipalities, and decentralized projects, if you like. I think there are some good examples of that things are happening. I am a little bit pessimistic when it comes to the national level, because it is so entrenched with the old system of, we do it this way, and there are no political ideologies, as Johan said. It's all about keeping your position, and the people that are there now have been there for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they have their own world, if you like, parallel with the rest of the country, and they just function on a different planet than the rest of us. So I'm not very optimistic in that sense, unfortunately. But I do think that if you go out of the capital, then there are a lot of good projects going on, and there's a lot of Haitians that are involved with civil society organizations, community leaders, etc. So in that sense, I am positive. But it's a long road ahead, for sure.
Well, thank you. If there aren't any more questions, I think we'll say thank you to Ingvild and Marianne, and to the people here in Bergen and the people listening in online. And I'm happy we were finally able to organize this meeting that was scheduled for this spring. And I hope it's not the last conversation we have on this exciting country that is Haiti. Thank you all.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.